Matthieu, hello, good afternoon.
Hello, Alison. How are you?
I'm well. Welcome to Breakaway. Where am I reaching you today?
Well, I'm at the vineyard in Saint Louis, just north of Saint-Hyacinthe in southern Quebec.
What actions are you doing in the vineyard today?
It's we're rushing through a very fast-paced summer at the moment, or it's just the beginning of summer, but it's been fast-paced since the vines broke out of dormancy. The weather has been terrific over the last few weeks. We've had some rain yesterday or in the last few days, but generally speaking, it's been great. So we have a lot of work in the vines. They're growing like crazy. We're just past flowering, so we're basically doing a lot of canopy work, shoot thinning the vines, clearing some leaves in front of the clusters so that we get more sun, better air movement, better drying of the grapes. So a lot of work on the vines at the moment.
Matthieu, you're the co-owner of Domaine du Nival. It's in the Montérégie, but I'm speaking to you today as the president of the Conseil des Vins du Québec. There's this recently announced creation of the Quebec Viticulture. I'm going to say it correctly. We're speaking today about the recently announced creation of the Quebec Viticulture and Enology Expertise Center in Oka that aims to promote the development and the competitiveness of Quebec's wine industry through research and technology. You are talking about all this work that needs to be done in the vineyard and hands in the dirt, as I can say. How essential is research and development for the growth of Quebec's wine industry?
It is crucial. It is something that has taken more and more, has been more and more at the forefront of what we do at the Conseil des Vins over the last few years. It generally, if we go back a few decades with the coming of age of a Quebec wine industry, a lot of winemakers, growers were basically on their own, doing a lot of trial and error out in the vineyard, trying new varieties, trying new ways or new pruning techniques, new ways of protecting the vines for the winter, new ways of making wine. And everyone was basically on their own, trying to talk with the neighbors, see what had gone well, what hadn't. But it was all trial and error. Most of the research in Canada was done elsewhere, in southern Ontario, obviously in the Niagara, in BC, in the Okanagan Valley, but very little was done in Quebec. And over the last few years, there's been more and more research being carried out by the CRAM, so the research institution that has just put together this new research facility. So the CRAM was carrying out a couple of research projects, but they didn't have the infrastructure to go further. And with this new research center, we're really seeing the whole research and development side of the industry really picking up and being in support of the growth of the Quebec wine industry and allowing winemakers and current and future vineyard owners to not make the same mistakes that some people have done before and be able to implement best practices based on our local climate, our local varieties, the reality of the Quebec wine industry, and not that of Ontario or of New York State or of European wine regions, really ours with our conditions.
So aims to improve the quality of Quebec wine specifically. How do you anticipate that the center will specifically impact the quality and reputation of Quebec wines?
It's definitely gonna help us move ahead in terms of quality, also in terms of profitability, and in terms of best practices to have a more stable yields in the vineyards, improving productivity, profitability of the different vineyards and wineries in Quebec. There's a lot of research that has already started, but that's going to be carried to a whole next level, especially in terms of winter protection, in terms of resistance of different grape varieties to our sometimes very harsh winter conditions here in Quebec. Mm-hmm. Trying out new varieties that may be better suited to our climate, to our especially the humidity and the rainfall that we sometimes have here in summer. A lot of work on that front. A lot of work that's going to be carried out also on pests and diseases and the best ways to deal with some of those challenges, especially fungal diseases, which are very prevalent in northeastern North America and Quebec. And there's also going to be a whole other side that was very, or that wasn't that present in the research that's already been done by the CAM, which is the whole enology and winemaking and even cider making process also. So there's going to be, because of the new facilities that the CAM has in Oka, with a state-of-the-art lab that's allowing them to carry out research in winemaking and winemaking techniques, we're really going to be able to move forward and understand better how to make wine especially out of the certain varieties that are not very much grown outside of Quebec. Mm-hmm. A lot of hybrid varieties, whether it be Frontenac or Marquette or La Crescent, a lot of those varieties for which we don't have that much background on how to best transform the grapes into wine.
It's interesting you mentioned Oka. The new center will be located on the land of La Cantina Vineyard in Oka. Why there specifically?
It's a great partnership that was developed between Vignoble Rivière du Chêne and La Cantina. So Vignoble Rivière du Chêne, who owns La Cantina, Daniel Lalande, the winemaker and owner of both vineyards, has opened its doors to this new research center at the CRAM, and they have their own little research vineyard on the site of La Cantina. It's also a great. There was already a research vineyard at the Oka Abbey that was planted over the last 20 years, but there wasn't much space anymore for increasing the size of this vineyard. So having a site that's right next door to the original research vineyard and now at La Cantina was a great way to make the most out of this existing vineyard, but also having more space for trials. And the Oka region is already a region that has a substantial number of vineyards established, one of the warmest growing regions in Quebec. So definitely a great site to implement a research vineyard that's going to be able to trial different varieties.
You highlighted there something that catches my attention in the sense that Oka has a very specific climate. How will you be able to adapt your findings to other vineyards or other regions, for example, like here on l'Île d'Orléans in Quebec City, or why not down in the Gaspé where we see vineyards popping up now, or here in Bellechasse on the south shore of Quebec?
Absolutely, and that's one of the great aspects of the Quebec wine industry is that compared to Ontario or BC, we're much more extended over sparse over all of Quebec, and there's a lot of activity happening in very different regions. But that's also, it's a great asset, but it's also a challenge to be able to tailor the work that the research center is going to do to the different regions. And there's going to be a lot of collaboration there already is, but with this new research center, there's going to be even more collaboration between the CAM and the various vineyards elsewhere in Quebec, including in the Quebec City area, where climate is significantly different from the Oka region. Mm-hmm. And especially in terms of trying out new varieties, the plan is to start at Oka, but then have partnerships with different vineyards in different regions to make sure that the results that we're seeing at Oka are also validated in different regions of Quebec.
Mm-hmm. Because you mentioned wine varieties I don't know, you said Frontenac, you said whatever.
Marquette, or exactly. Even Chardonnay or Pinot Noir. Yeah.
But you, let's go back to you yourself. You grow Pinot Noir, Gamaret, Vidal, Albarino. I mean, these varieties for vineyards are part of the signature. They're part of how you attract new customers and how you stand out in this winemaking landscape in Quebec, in Canada, or wherever. How are you going to choose which varietals that you focus on?
There's already we've over the last 40 years of Quebec viticulture, we've seen so much trial of different varieties. We have a very broad spectrum of different grape varieties, over 80 varieties that are currently grown in Quebec. However, about 15 of those varieties make up the core of Quebec viticulture, and we're starting to see what the winners are, what varieties are thriving in certain regions and certain areas. But there's also, and I think it might be something that's a little specific to Quebec within the Canadian wine industry, but there's a lot of interest here for trying out new things, for pushing the limits and trying new varieties. And I think it's going to continue. And I often say that the flagship variety for Quebec might not even be planted already in Quebec, planted yet in Quebec. And we might, so we need to continue trying out new varieties. In a changing climate, it's going to be an asset to be able to try new varieties to see if the varieties of yesterday are still appropriate for a changing climate, for the summers that are getting warmer, sometimes wetter also, for winters that are not as cold as they used to be. What varieties are going to thrive here in 10, 20, 50 years? Because when we plant a vineyard, we plant it for a century, hopefully, and not only for a year or two.
Yeah, definitely not something that happens overnight. Matthieu, with this new center, can you tell me a little bit about the vision for the future of the Quebec wine industry in terms of maybe growth or competitiveness and even recognition?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's been tremendous growth in the Quebec wine industry over the last 5 to 10 years. Of course, the pandemic and all the focus on locally made products, local production, not only in wine but in food in general, and even outside of the world of food, has been a tremendous boost to the Quebec wine industry in terms of sales. We've seen production go up by 50% over the last 5 years, going from about 2 million bottles in 2018, 2019 to about 3 million bottles a year produced by the Quebec wine industry. Now, it's only a drop in the ocean of all the wine that is consumed in Quebec. Mm-hmm. The SAQ sells about 250 million bottles a year, so we're running at about 1% of total sales. So there's a lot of space for growth. We're, in terms of percentage of local wine consumption, we're way behind Ontario and British Columbia, the two other major winemaking provinces in Canada. There's definitely a lot of space for growth. There's also a lot of interest in the Quebec wine consumption world for what's being produced locally, and renewed interest and a lot of recognition by the consumers that quality has increased tremendously over the last 10 years. A lot of people have given Quebec wine a second or a third chance and are now, fans of what's being done here. So there's a lot of opportunity for growth. I think we need to keep on working on quality, constantly improving the quality of what we do. And we also need to increase production, because for a lot of vineyards or a lot of wineries in Quebec, demand has gone beyond what we can offer on the market. So we need to step up production, continue to work on quality. Some Quebec vineyards are starting to export even outside of Quebec. Not a whole lot, because again, the local market, I think we're far from having saturated the local market, but there's definitely some interest in exporting outside of Quebec to, let's say, Ontario, the United States, New York, Chicago, and even over to Europe.
Absolutely. In Michelin star restaurants, we're saying hello to Frédéric Tremblay, if he's listening, from Vignoble Camille right now. He was on the CBC Breakaway to talk about his success over the last years. But Matthieu, this is a very positive perspective on the situation. I'm hearing boots on the ground of a lot of vineyards who are stuck with their productions and have trouble selling their wines because there needs to be more education. Consumers need to be more educated about Quebec wines. Is there a role for that within that new center, but also how does the Conseil des Vins du Québec do that?
You're right. I mean, we've seen the interest again in local production during the pandemic, and we're sort of seeing the backlash of that a little bit post pandemic, where people, and it's not even just Quebec wine or consumption of Quebec wine that's been lowered a little bit, but even the consumption of wine in general, we're seeing that in the SAQ numbers. Sales are down, so it's more of a general pattern in the industry. Now, yes, there needs to be more education there, and that goes beyond even the Conseil des Vins or the vineyards or the winemakers themselves. It extends to sommeliers. It extends to stores, grocery stores or specialty stores that sell Quebec wine. The SAQ, I think it's a joint effort, and definitely the Conseil des Vins du Québec has a role to play in making sure that this whole network of ambassadors is knowledgeable about Quebec wine, can offer advice to consumers, can direct them to wines that they might prefer over, there's a whole range of Quebec wines. It's not true that it's, only this or that type of wine, but there's something for everyone. So we need a network of people around the wineries themselves that is able to reach out to consumers and convince them to give Quebec wines a try. Because I think, and the proof is in the bottle and in the glass, and once people try Quebec wines, more often than not, they're very surprised. And still a lot of sommeliers, for example, will put Quebec wines blind in a restaurant setting, will offer them to consumers without telling them that it's a local wine. And once the consumers has committed itself by saying that they like it, then they get the information that it's produced 50 kilometers, 20 kilometers from here. So there needs to be still more education, more having people try out Quebec wines. But I think it's an ongoing process. It's something we're in for the next 20, 30, 50 years. But we're definitely up for the challenge, whether at the Conseil des Vins or as a winemaker myself.
Tasting is understanding and liking, of course. Matthieu, thank you so much for dropping by Breakaway today. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Alison.